Join the conversation with Coach Wright.
Welcome to another episode of Join the Conversation with Coach Wright. I'm your host, Kurinn Wright, and today we're diving into a powerful topic, breaking through limiting beliefs. But before we jump into today's discussion, I'd like to recap the homework I gave you in our last episode. Your assignment was to identify specific barriers like fear, negative self-talk, or limiting beliefs that are holding you back from your potential. From there, you were supposed to choose one barrier to focus on for the week and commit to one action step that will challenge it. At the end of the week, you're supposed to reflect on your progress. What was that experience like for you? And what did you learn about yourself? Completing this assignment trains you to break the automatic patterns that quietly limit your growth. By identifying a specific barrier like fear, negative self-talk, or a limiting belief, you force yourself to face the invisible roadblocks you may have been carrying without realizing it. Choosing one barrier to focus on and committing to one real action step moves you from awareness into action, which is where all real transformation happens. It's not about fixing everything at once. It's about proving to yourself that change starts with one decision, one moment of courage at a time. Reflecting at the end of each week allows you to gather evidence of your strength, notice where your mindset is shifting, and build the resilience needed to keep growing. This process strengthens self-trust, sharpens your leadership over your own life, and ultimately unlocks more of your potential, not just once, but over and over again, as you continue doing the work. I'm thrilled to announce our special guest today, Coach PJ Wilks. PJ is the founder of Today Pivot, a transformative coaching group designed to empower individuals across the globe to navigate life's challenges and build lasting success. With over 15 years of experience in the tech industry and a strong background in sales leadership, PJ has helped countless professionals through significant career transition and personal growth. Her coaching philosophy centers on guiding people through life's challenges, improving their professional skills, and building unshakable confidence. Coach PJ is known for her strategic, personalized coaching approach, and her work has empowered many, not only to meet but exceed their goals. Coach PJ is here to share her expertise on limiting beliefs, and I am super excited for her to be able to unpack this topic with us today. This specific topic is essential for anyone who's feeling stuck or facing self-doubt. Welcome to Join the Conversation, Coach PJ.
Thanks so much for having me, Kurinn. I'm excited to be here today.
Absolutely. I have a lot of questions for you, Coach PJ, but we're going to start out with what I talked to our listeners about the last time we were together, and they had some homework. They were supposed to identify a specific barrier like fear, negative self-talk, or limiting belief, and commit to an action step. Yes, right?
Yeah.
And, they were supposed to commit to at least one action step with whichever one of those they chose. But you're here as our expert on debunking limiting beliefs, and, it's a pleasure to bring you in to talk to them about this. So can you tell our listeners, what are limiting beliefs?
Yes, because Coach Wright is all about action.
All about
so true.
it?
Yes.
I'm glad you know me, PJ.
So a limiting belief is anything that you hold true that hinders you from reaching and achieving any of your goals or desires. And these things can continuously negatively impact your confidence, your motivations, and they prevent you from taking action by creating psychological barriers that stop you from trusting yourself enough to take risk or to pursue opportunities that make you a little less comfortable, like to take you out of your comfort zone, something that you're still growing in. A lot of times we tell ourselves, I could never do that, or that would never work out. So that's what a limiting belief starts to sound like when you start to think about expanding or shooting your shot for something that has always been a dream, or someone gives you an opportunity that could take you to the next level, and you just kind of pause and say, I don't know if I'm good enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting because the way you describe it here, it's the equivalent of when people are dealing with negative self-talk.
Exactly.
And they may not know where that negative self-talk derived from, but it is deriving from a limiting belief.
That's right. And negative self-talk is what you're having with yourself on an ongoing basis unless you check it, because it's the voice that you're having the most conversations with. You're having conversations with yourself when you're walking down the street and you're not saying anything, or you're sitting in a team meeting and your mind is somewhere completely else. Those conversations with yourself really do become truth if there's not any other voice to combat it.
That's good. That is really good observation of that, because it's almost like having a best friend that is always talking to you, except that voice isn't friendly.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And you wouldn't talk to your friends like that. So if you think about if someone who you love dearly, and this could be anyone, came to you and said, hey, I was really thinking about applying to this school, or I was thinking about applying for this position at work, and you would give them full court, like, yes, that's exactly what you should do. And you would run a list about why they should do it and how qualified they are. That same conversation and the same energy has to be internal. And that has to be it's a little bit harder to do when you know yourself and you know your traumas, you know where you've come from, and all of those negative thoughts are coming from somewhere. Yeah. So that's why it's so important to identify what thoughts to listen to and to play the whole tape. Don't just stop at like how hard this is going to be. Play the entire tape out. It's okay, so this is hard. Have you ever done hard things? Give yourself an example of a time you've done a hard thing. Yeah. So it's a whole process that I know we're going to talk about more today. But yeah, that's where limits and beliefs start.
No, I really like that challenge you called out right there. And I think that's something that a lot of people can just take that nugget and run with, because that's something that, even though this is a hard process, that's something that people can do today, like immediately, to put in place as a buffer between limiting beliefs and wanted thoughts.
100%.
In your experience, how do limiting beliefs impact people's ability to move forward and achieve success, especially when it comes to career transition or personal growth?
I think the hardest part about moving forward with limiting beliefs is when you fail to acknowledge that that's what they are. Mm-hmm. So the biggest takeaway is to identify truth from a limiting belief. And this is where the journey starts, because then you're going to start really thinking about, so I have a limiting belief, and the limiting beliefs will sound like, I'm not good enough. I don't deserve to have nice things. And that's going to be deeply rooted. So for example, fear of failure can show up when we equate our mistakes with our personal worth. So instead of seeing fear as our guiding force, we should look at what we're scared of and seeing the failure as feedback and growth, rather than internalizing the failure for the inevitable. This can develop into a limiting belief that gives you pause when you decide to pursue new things, especially if your fear of failure shows up in the way that you equate your personal worth. And I feel like a lot of people, precisely women, tend to really put their value on how much they can contribute to things. And if you can't contribute at the level that you consider excellent, and in some cases perfecting, then you will tend to just not take the shot.
Like shy away from it. Yeah, you doubt yourself, right?
100%. It's that limiting belief that failure is inevitable. And so you'd rather play the background than have the visibility for other people to see you fail. So, for example, when I first started coaching, which started this whole journey of debunking belief, I was the one being coached. And I didn't realize that a lot of my thoughts and how I even moved was so deeply impacted on what I believed I was actually capable of doing. Wow. And so my coach had to challenge me to say, well, I understand you think that, but what if that's not the truth? And I had never even considered that.
Look at that, challenging the thought, right?
Yes, just challenging the thought. So I think that that's a super important part of my journey, is that I do have this innate sense that perfection is the goal rather than excellence. And so when I have an opportunity to step outside of the box and do something that's highly visible, but also something that I've never done before, something that I have to learn as I'm going, I trust myself a little bit less because I haven't done it before. And so that's when I start to think about, what else am I doing like that?
Right.
Yeah.
You start assessing areas where you're not like taking action and asking yourself, is this rooted in a limiting belief?
100%. And imposter syndrome has its own set of symptoms, right? You could have multiple things going on. Some of it is just fear of failure, and some of it is like, am I even supposed to be here?
Yeah.
Right? It's the belief that we don't even deserve the seat that we're sitting in. Like somehow someone has mistakenly given us credit for something that we did not deserve, and we're just waiting to be found out.
That's a truth for lots of people. I've encountered a lot of thinking like that. I can even think back to some of my own limiting beliefs. I know the ones I'm working through now, and I understand how they've translated in my life. Can you share some of the most common limiting beliefs with us?
Sure. So it's going to be different for everyone, but I've heard this over and over again. I am not good enough. I don't have enough experience. I could never learn something like that at this age. I missed my shot as a kid. This is how life is going to be. I don't deserve nice things. Or what if they find out who I really am and they see that I'm not as valuable as they think I am? That could be in your personal relationships, in your professional relationships, and in your family relationships. Those things continue to show up. So those are some examples of like when you're having talks with yourself. If it's starting to sound like that, that's what that is. That's a limiting belief.
How can people identify limiting beliefs?
A limiting belief is anything that you hold true that hinders you. So if you're looking to see what limiting beliefs you're battling, look back at everything you never tried, but you had the opportunity to.
That's a really good way to look at it. What are the things that I had an opportunity to explore that I did not explore? And then maybe asking themselves, like, why didn't I explore that?
100%. Yeah. Because your self-talk is going to try to mitigate any risk. So it's going to say, yeah, that job is open and you have 5 years experience and you know the hiring manager, and this should be a great opportunity for you. You should totally apply for that job. And then you're thinking to yourself, I don't know, like what I know him as a person, but I don't know if I would be good as his employee. What if we don't get along? And you'll start to think that you're protecting yourself. You'll say, I want that relationship to stay that. I want to keep him as a mentor. If I have to work for him, it'll change the dynamic. When really you're telling yourself, I respect that person so much that I would be such a failure if I weren't able to meet their standards. I'd rather never even take the job.
That I'm sure people can resonate with. It's almost like you're telling yourself no and convincing yourself why it is a no, instead of telling yourself yes and convincing yourself why it's a yes.
Yeah, you're saying no, just like in relationships. It's a defense mechanism. I say no so you don't get to. I say I'm going to fail so that you don't see me fail. Mm-hmm. And then I color it with the guise of, I want to protect this as a mentor. Or I just want to learn a little bit more. I'm going to take a few more modules under this assignment and see if maybe I feel more prepared. It's always going to be something that holds you back instead of pushing you forward.
You mentioned imposter syndrome, and I wanted you to drive that home for us and kind of talk to us a little bit about the relationship between imposter syndrome and limiting beliefs.
Yeah, so honestly, I feel like limiting beliefs and imposter syndromes are first cousins. Right? It's like, which auntie's house are you going to? And neither one of them are the one that you should stay at, right? So the imposter syndrome and limiting belief both lie in the internal narratives that we tell ourselves that undermine our self-value, our capability, and our belonging. And 9 times out of 10, if you are dealing with imposter syndrome, the root core of that is stemming from a limiting belief.
Now
So
that simplifies it so much.
oh yeah, limiting beliefs deeply impact how we perceive how we move forward. And a lot of times that means not moving forward and sitting stagnant. I'm not smart enough. I'll never be successful. If I go for that, then everyone will know that they're scared of being exposed.
Yeah.
Where normally you have these thoughts to yourself, and if no one is challenging you, you're just like, yeah, this is why I have this job. This is why I didn't get into that school. This is why that relationship didn't work out. And you're putting it all back on you. But you're not really evaluating the scenario to see what's the whole scope, what's the entire picture, and challenging those thoughts.
You know, 2 words stand out to me when you were speaking, and one is safe. Safe because it could feel safe in the moment to not take those actions because nothing's going to hurt me if I don't move. But then there's also the word stuck, because that recipe of things happening in your headspace is what usually causes people to feel stuck.
That's 100% true as well. If you're rooted in self-doubt, then every action in your life is going to have that as the common denominator. So if you think about it as a limiting belief, it sounds like I'm not smart enough. But imposter syndrome is the action behind the belief, or the lack of action, right? It manifests a persistent fear of being exposed. But the limiting belief is self-doubt. So if you already are completely qualified, you've done all the things, and you still are telling yourself you're not good enough, and then you have a leader or a peer or ally who's saying, yeah, you should totally do that. You're like, well, if I do it, then they're also going to know that I'm not good. And that's the person that I rely on to remind me that maybe I can do something. So the relationship between the limiting belief and the imposter syndrome, they're first cousins. They know your whole family. They know everything about you. And they talk to each other behind your back. So really, when you're showing up, you're trying to show up in a way that doesn't make you stay stagnant, but you don't have the tools to do that. And so it manifests in a number of ways. Fear-based thinking, performance and perfectionism, pressure, internalized conditioning, and then they go and reinforce each other. But you may not have the language to call them what they are. Because some people don't believe they're imposters. They believe that is exactly the truth. You just don't know yet. I am not capable of doing this.
Can you talk to us about some real world examples?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give you a personal example. During my coaching journey, I was meeting with my life coach on a weekly basis, and I went to a session feeling extremely stressed. And he asked me, how do you want to use this time today? And I told him my senior VP wants me to speak on an all hands call. And he was excited about that. He said, okay, great. What does he want you to speak about? Do you need help preparing? Like what has you stressed? And I was more stressed about the visibility. I didn't want to do an all hands call because that meant that was the entire company. We're talking across the globe, right? And who am I to be on this all hands call? And what am I talking about that's going to keep their value? Those were the first 3 questions when he said that, on top of my stomach going into knots. Wow. So, you know, your body responds to your limiting beliefs as well. And so the thing that I think changed the game for me was that session. And I bring that up because he challenged me to say, I understand that this may be a little scary because of the scope and the audience and the size of it and who's asking you to do it. But is there just a little piece of that that's also exciting? And I thought, ooh, again, another challenge, right?
Yeah.
And what I got from that conversation was I was only using one language to describe multiple things. Mm-hmm. And he said, I feel like you only lean on your negative emotion. So even if you're excited about something, you'll call it stress.
Right.
And yes, it is a little stressful, but it's also exciting. And when you talk about the visibility, you say it's scary because everyone will see it and who are you, but it's also exciting because everyone will know who you are. And what if you do a really good job? And what doors could that possibly open for you? And so he just challenged me to think about, yes, there are these scary parts of it, but there's also these other exciting parts of it. And so let's use the right language when we're describing our feelings. And once I did that, I realized I was actually a little bit more excited than I was scared. And yes, I knew I had to prepare, but because I'm so hard on myself, I knew I would be prepared. Mm-hmm. And this was an opportunity that I just had to take. And so it was the first time that something that grand came up and I felt prepared to at least take the risk. And it all started from me saying, oh, absolutely not. I'm completely stressed out. What if I fail? Everybody's going to know. I'm going to be exposed. It really brought my attention to the fact that I was literally living inside of my limiting beliefs, even though I wasn't calling them that.
Yeah. So him challenging you. It's that word, challenge. Challenging yourself changes things, right?
Yes.
Now, how did you do? I want to know the outcome. I'm invested in this story.
The funny thing is the all hands call never even happened.
Wow.
Our company ended up going into a financial spin and we had 4 rounds of layoffs in 14 months. And even though the all hands call didn't happen because we had far more severe things to talk about by the time the layoffs were coming around, it was the internal work that I had to do to prepare because I didn't know that wasn't going to happen. I still had to action as though that's exactly what the expectation was for me. And on the other side of that, even not having to do it, I felt a disappointment. And then I realized that's because you wanted this.
Look at
and
that.
You were going to talk yourself
got
out.
There.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. You never would have got to that. I want this if you hadn't challenged. The first challenge for you was, let me talk to someone about this. And then you challenged yourself after speaking to your coach who, gave you that insight. And then you wanted it. So how many times do we look back at life and we've had those moments where, what if I leaned the other way? How would that
I'm really glad you asked about the outcome because I don't think I had even thought about the fact that it didn't happen still had an impact on my path. Because that's when I realized where the disappointment, I had to give it a name. And my coach was like, okay, so now that didn't happen, but you've prepared it, how can you still leverage it? How can you still use it? So then that came the next challenge. I thought I was over it. Like, whew, that was disappointing, but at least I didn't have to do it. And then I went back into the session with my coach, like, well, I didn't have to do it. So, and he was like, well, how do you feel about that? And I was like, honestly, I was a little disappointed because I felt so prepared. And he says, so now what? How do we still get that out there? How do you still share what's going to help the organization, even if it's not an all hands call? And to me, because I wasn't asked to still try to incorporate this, it was even more of a challenge on me to put myself out there and say, hey, I really want you to take a look at something. So just this ongoing process of, I didn't have to do that, but I'm kind of sad I didn't have to do that. But why are you sad? And how many things have you said no to that you really wanted, but because it was under the guise of stress and pressure, you talked yourself out of it like you were protecting yourself?
Coach PJ, you mentioned having a coach and you are indeed a coach yourself. Can you give our listeners some insight around that?
Yes. So I personally believe iron sharpens iron. So there's not going to be too many people who are doing something at an expert level that doesn't have someone that they're learning from. You should always have someone that you're reaching up for and someone that you're pulling up with you. So my coaching experience was this really transformational journey. And during that journey, my coach himself actually said, have you ever thought about doing this? For others? And I was like, I think I kind of do this for free all the time. I feel like I'm always kind of, to your point, Coach Wright, how you said in your journey, you realized you had been coaching already.
Yeah.
That was
before
something.
The title, right?
Yeah. Before you actually gave yourself the title, you were actually doing the work. And so when I thought about that on a bigger scale, who I could help and people who don't even know to ask for help, seeing someone who looks like them saying, I've done this before. I just thought about it on a deeper level, and I felt like, yeah, I think I could actually have some impact here. I think I have a voice for people who don't even know what they're dealing with sometimes because they don't have the language.
Yeah.
And so as a result of that, I started this journey about learning to become a coach. And part of that journey is having a coach. And I believe that that's probably a practice I'm going to continue throughout my entire career, because I really love having someone to bounce ideas off of and to grow from, because we're all experiencing different type of clients and different type of circumstances.
Yeah.
And so coming together with other subject matter experts and collaborating and learning from each other, I just think makes more sense than not.
I absolutely love that. You know, you've shared some very insightful stuff with us today, a lot of great information. And now that we know what limiting beliefs are, we understand them, we understand how they impact us and hold us back. Can you share with us some ways that people can debunk limiting beliefs?
So, practical steps for debunking limiting beliefs. Here we go. Name it to reframe it. So we just talked about a little bit how you give things the right name. And so if we're not calling things by the right name, then we cannot address them in the right way. Right. So naming the limiting belief as a limiting belief, and then learning to reframe it. And I'll give you an example. The limiting belief could be, that is too expensive. I do not live on that level. I don't deserve to have anything like that if I'm not making that kind of money. The reframe is, wow, I've always been attracted to really nice things, and I'm going to make an effort to make sure that I start collecting nice things because I deserve that. I'll find things that I can afford. And instead of feeling bad about the fact that you can't go get this Cartier watch, you're looking at it like, what can I get that's in my budget that feels nice to me? Because it's about accepting the fact that you deserve nice things. You just have to plan for them. So that's the name it, and that's the reframe it.
I like that a lot. I think that would be something easy for listeners to adopt.
Yeah, I think it's the first step. But I think what's going to surprise the listeners is how often they're going to have to do this throughout the day.
Right.
How many limiting thoughts you're actually having on an ongoing basis. I also really recommend just writing them down every time they pop into your head, so that when you really have a chance to sit down and look at them, you're going to be able to get a full scope about how you truly feel about yourself based on every limiting thought that you wrote down. And now that you've written it down, do the exercise of reframing each one.
That's really good, because if I am able to write it on paper, whether I journal or not, and I say, this is something that I've been telling myself, I also now have to challenge that by reframing it. And when I have so many of those written down, if I'm still struggling, all I need to do is really go back to that book or workbook or whatever, the journal, and just look at, where did I start with my thinking and how far have I gotten? That's a good way to track over time. Am I improving?
Exactly. And, I'm glad you brought that up about whether you journal or not, because I get a lot of kickback from my clients saying every time I go to therapy or anytime I talk to a coach, they always want you to journal. Hey, do it the way you do it. It doesn't have to be a book where you're sitting there writing with a lamp every night. It could be a Post-it note. You could do a voice note. Don't make excuses about the method, right? Just get into the action. So do what works for you. Name it to reframe it. The next challenge, after you've written them all down or you've spoken them out or you've kept track of them in some type of way, is to look at each of them and identify, where does the root come from for this belief?
Yeah.
And that's going to be some shadow work. You're going to sit there and deal with the darkest sides of yourself, and it's uncomfortable. So a lot of times we don't want to do the uncomfortable things, but debunking limiting beliefs is uncomfortable because you have to identify why you believe it in the first place. And when you think about that and you start to journey back to why do I believe that I cannot be in a healthy relationship? Why do I believe that I am not worthy of love? Why do I believe that I am not smart enough? By the time you get to the crux of where those come from, it comes from a multitude of places. But sometimes those places are painful. So we're talking childhood trauma. What is your household vibe? What was your parents' relationship with the family? Yeah. What was her relationship with her family? And what was your father's relationship with his? What is happening in the culture right now? Does the culture say that your shape is in season, or is your shape out of season? Is your skin tone just right, or are you a little bit too light, or are you a little bit too dark? It's whatever's happening, whatever's popular. Is how you look at your body, is how you look at your lips, is how you look at your hair. Primarily speaking, as a Black woman, the things that I look at and what society responds to deeply impacts how I raise my daughter. And how I want her to feel about her hair, and how I want her to feel about her skin tone. So it's just, the culture is a huge piece of it.
Yeah.
And then if you failed at anything in the past, how did you handle failure? What was the response to your failures from the people nearest to you? How did you attach your worth to success? Like, digging into this stuff is no fun. Like, comparing yourself to other people. Who compared you? Why did you start doing that?
This is some important information here, because and when you mentioned that part about how the hard things might come up, we want to remind you that you do not have to go at this alone. If you find that you're digging deep and going into something that's really troubling you, please consider seeking out some type of therapy to address those things and do the work with a therapist. If you're someone who feels like it's not on a severe level, but it still bothers you, at least on a 3 out of 1 to 10, maybe that would be someone who needs to pursue coaching to just, get out some of these things and work on what forward looks like. So, I hope today was beneficial for you listeners out there to be able to really get this information from Coach PJ.
Yeah, 100%. Yes, absolutely. Seeking help, I think, is the most important part of this, because as you get into the thick of it and you start to challenge yourself, now you're having both thoughts, and you may need help to sort how to navigate actioning the new thoughts and where to put the old ones. But it's going to just start with challenging the narrative. And as you challenge the narrative, you're going to build more evidence to conflict with that narrative. And that's the work. That's the good part. That's where you've gotten through how painful everything is, and that 8th grade bully really sucked, but you didn't realize it stuck with you like that. Therapy is going to help you with that. If those are deep rooted, painful things, therapy is great for that. And you can partner that therapy with your coach, because the therapy is going to be like, let's talk about why we're like this. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about where that comes from. Let's talk about coping skills. And then your coach is going to be like, okay, now that we know where that comes from, how do we move forward?
Yes.
What are our action steps to move forward? And so one of the biggest things that I think we have to identify is that you are not having limiting ideas. You are having limiting beliefs.
My gosh.
Okay?
Yes.
So let's talk about the difference between an idea and a belief. Okay? Mm-hmm. An idea is defined as a thought, a concept, or a suggestion that comes to mind. A suggestion. It's exploratory, it's flexible, and it can change. That's an idea. So listen to those difference in the words. An idea is a concept, it's flexible, and it's subject to change. Now pivot to a belief. A belief is defined as a conviction or an acceptance of something that is true. It's often deeply rooted in personal experience, culture, or emotions. So look at the difference between idea and belief. Idea is concept, flexible, subject to change. Belief is accepted as truth, deeply rooted, and tied to emotions.
You know what? I'm going to say this because you're opening up some thoughts here for me. When you describe the belief versus the idea, I also want to caution people not to confuse the limited belief for a value. Because when we grow up, we can't adopt values, that we can adopt beliefs that we transition the thought of that belief into a value in our adulthood and say, well, no, this is what we do in our house because it's what you had to do as a result of something growing up. So now you've adopted that as a value instead of, so there's a lot in here that can be kind of parallel, but I love how you broke that down between the idea and the limiting belief. But we also want you to challenge your, not challenge, but look into your values and ask yourself, are these my values or are these limiting beliefs from my childhood?
Oh, I think that's so important. And that goes back, it doesn't have to be childhood trauma, but it's how you were raised. Yeah. And culturally, some of the things that we struggle with as African Americans is what goes on in this house stays in this house. And so I'm in my 40s. I still respect that rule with my kids, and I have to figure out where that stops. Because when I grew up, it didn't stop. Let somebody call my mama and tell her something that happened in my house. Let that happen and see what happened, right?
Yeah.
But now we're teaching our kids, if you see something, say something.
Right. So that, that's why it's important to distinguish the difference between your values and limiting beliefs so that you can know, who am I? What do I believe? What is my life based on? Is it based on, this passive limiting belief I've been carrying with me, or is this based on an active value, an active push forward that I want to exist? This is a good breakdown in this.
Yeah, I love that you brought up values. I feel like I need to incorporate that into my workshop too, because a value feels even more personal than a belief.
It does.
Because it's handed down.
Yeah.
Right? So it's almost like an heirloom. And if the whole family carries this value that maybe they've never even questioned, I challenge you to say that that's where racism lives and ageism lives. And the things that we don't ask ourselves, do I really believe this?
Right.
Is that what I am tied to? Is that really indicative of my heart, who I am? And then if you think back to it, a lot of us just vote how our parents tell us to vote.
That is true too. It's because it's how we're being shaped by our environment, experiences, all those things. And I like asking yourself, is this what I value? Is this what I like? Do I like this?
Is it nature or is it nurture?
Right.
Innately, I want to share things. Innately, I want to get other people's perspectives. But based on nurturing in my life experiences, I don't want to feel exposed or vulnerable. And so I get locked into my own head and I only listen to those thoughts. And then it depends on how much you're willing to be authentic enough to challenge that out loud. So values, we are adding that one to the menu.
To the list and put it on the matrix.
Yes, ideas, beliefs, and values.
Yes.
So understanding that those things are coming from somewhere, challenging it. And then the last part to debunking the limiting belief is to take one brave action at a time. Yes. One brave action. So that could look like, hey, I've been volunteering at this church forever, and now the pastor wants me to do the welcome message. And to you, that could be like everything and terrifying all the same moment. This is the brave action. The one yes that you would have normally said no to and giving yourself 16 reasons why you were valid for saying no.
Right.
We're going to say yes to something that is positive and challenging us to move forward.
And so let's just the excitement attached to it, right?
And calling it by the right name.
Yeah.
So let's just run really quick through the things that we talked about that we need to do, our practical steps to overcome limiting beliefs. We're going to name it to reframe it. We're going to find the root. We're going to challenge the narrative by building our evidence. And I think we talked about that, but let's just give you one more example. This class is going to be hard. The reframe to that is I can do hard things.
Yes.
The evidence to that is I passed economics in college. There you go.
Yes.
You got a whole proof. Evidence. You got a whole system there.
Yeah.
And then after you build your evidence, you take one brave action. For each of those limiting beliefs, this is life's work. Okay? These are things that I assure you, even the people who you look up to are still dealing with. We are always in the process of debunking a limiting belief. So there's not really an expert. I speak on it because I live it. So I've given you a recipe for how we're going to challenge all of the limiting beliefs that come into our mind on an ongoing basis. Here's a bonus. I challenge you to also surround yourself with expansive voices. So you can't do the same thing and expect a different result. You're doing the inner thought work, you're challenging, you're doing the exercises to reframe, you're putting yourself out there and taking brave steps. Now you need to be around like-minded people. You need to seek out other people who are in the same headspace of growth and debunking limiting beliefs and challenging themselves and getting out of imposter syndrome mode to get to the other side. And so if you keep yourself around what reinforces your limiting beliefs, it's going to be really hard to break that mindset. So with that being said, breaking through limiting beliefs is not a one-time event. It's a practice. So every time you challenge one, you will find yourself getting a little lighter, just a little bit more free. Then you will also see in your actions that you're getting a little more bolder and closer to the person that you were always meant to be in the first place.
Excellent, PJ. You've made great points here today, and I have learned something from you, some things that I won't forget, and I appreciate you for your time. Can you tell our listeners where they can find you? Of course.
Yes, of course. So I have a website. It's www.todaypivot.com, because what better day is there to pivot than the day that you are in? And on LinkedIn, you can find me as Pivot Coaching and Consulting. I'm still building out TikTok, but you can look up at Coach PJ with the number 3.
Thank you so much, PJ.
Thank you.
If you find yourself toiling with limiting beliefs and feel you could use support getting them under control, reach out to Coach PJ. And if you feel that what you need goes beyond the scope of coaching, consider reaching out to a therapist. Most times you'll find many employers offer access to therapy through your health insurance. Either way, my hope is that you take an action that supports your needs. Remember, as Coach PJ said, start by taking one bold step. And I'll add to that, no matter how big or small, make it bold. Today's affirmation: my beliefs do not limit my potential. And what makes that affirmation true is that you have the power to challenge your limiting beliefs. So again, my beliefs do not limit my potential. In my last episode, I challenged you to identify a specific barrier like fear, negative self-talk, or limiting beliefs. This week, for homework, I would like for you to consider reframing your thoughts. For every negative thought that arises this week, pause and reframe it into a positive, empowering thought. By the end of the week, reflect on how this shift impacted your mindset and actions. In our next episode, the driver versus the passenger, taking control of your life. That's right, putting you back in the power seat, something you don't want to miss. We're going to explore where you are through 2 amazing stories that I'll be sharing with you. One on the driver versus the passenger, and another metaphor interweaved on are you taking the main stage as the writer, director, and main character in your life. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. And if you want to stay connected, you can find this podcast not only on YouTube, but also on Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music. Until next time, let's keep the conversation going. Enjoy the conversation with Coach Wright.
Stay a while and subscribe.